Have you ever been curious about the difference between homeschooling and public school? And I'm not talking about the obvious differences. What I'm talking about is the day-to-day. How does it differ? What about those little things? Well, today I'm going to share with you 12 things that my homeschool does not do, but the public school does. Before we get started on today's video, welcome, I'm Leigh, and right here on this channel is where I share all the behind the scenes about our homeschool. I share about tips and tricks, curriculum, reasons for why we homeschool, and just how does that look in the day-to-day. If you haven't already, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. But right now, let's talk about the 12 things the public school does, but I don't do these things in my homeschool. If you are new to homeschool or thinking about homeschooling, or maybe you've kind of dipped your toes in a little bit and are feeling overwhelmed, I have a one-on-one coaching program where I just have the awesome privilege of being able to work with homeschool moms and get you just up and running into a place where you feel really good about your homeschool. There's more details and a link in the description below, so if you're interested in that, let me know. I'd love to connect with you over that. All right, let's talk about those 12 things that the public school does, but I don't do them here in my homeschool. Are you ready? Here we go. Number 1, grading. And I'm not talking about first grade, second grade, third grade. I'm talking about grading. What I'm talking about is giving them letter grades, such as, you got an A in this, a B, or you failed this, 70%, 90%. So I don't do any of the numbers or the percentages when it comes to my kids' work. Why don't I do those things? Because I think it's unnecessary. I know exactly how my kids are doing. If you want to know at any point how they are doing in, say, math, or how they're doing in science, or how they're doing in reading, language arts, writing, I can tell you. I don't need a number grade. So I get it why that's used in the school system, but I don't need to do that here in our homeschool. I don't have to give them grades. And then some people say, well, what about, if they go into higher education, how are they gonna know? I do add some grades, let's just say towards the end of high school, but it's not necessarily me grading them. My kids in their junior, senior year of high school have the option of taking dual enrollment college courses, and so those are obviously going to grade them. I've talked about grading. It's not a huge deal in our home, and my kids have done really fine. To them, they get the grade and like, oh, okay, because we don't put an emphasis on it. And that's really a reason. I don't want them to learn something just to get a good grade on it. I want them to learn something because it's either interesting, or maybe it's something that I find interesting that I want to, it's some way that it's something that adds to their life. So I do not grade any of my kids' schoolwork, which leads us into number 2 thing that I do not do, but public school does, and that is testing. I don't do, okay, so there's 2 different types of testings. There could be periodic testing that maybe you do for subjects. So that would be called subject testing, whether it's a quiz every week or every unit or a couple of lessons, whatever maybe a curriculum might have lined out. That is different than standardized testing. Let's talk about the subject testing first. I don't do any of those. If a certain curriculum, so the math that my 8th grader is doing, if you're curious as to what curriculum he's doing, I did a video on that a couple videos back. You can check that out. So the math that he is doing, there are tests and there's a test booklet. However, as the one in charge of his education, I can give him that test and call it a test, but I don't do that. I do include the test, but I don't call it a test. I might write in his assignment book test, but it's an open book test. It is used more so as a review. I take it as a time. So I do actually go through the process, and it says, after lesson 5, give test 1. And I'll go ahead and do that. And that's just what he does for math that day. To me, it's just a review. It's a solidification. And if he was to do really bad on that test, then I would know there's some things that he needs some more work on, and we would go back and do that. But I don't go through it then, and I don't grade it. I don't say, oh, you got an A on your, review day. You got a B on your review day. I simply say, you got these couple of wrong. Let's go back and redo them. And the number 3 thing that I don't do in my homeschool, but the public school does, and actually I don't even know if they do this anymore. I was a child of went to public school in the 80s and 90s, and it is the No Child Left Behind. Okay, so technically in my homeschool, no child is left behind. But I also don't have to hold back a child if they are progressing in a subject super fast. So when I say no child left behind, there's 2 different sides to that coin. That means that I can work at the pace of my child. If, say, they aren't up to a 5th grade level of math, they just kind of struggle in it. Nobody says I have to do a 5th grade level of math. Nobody says I have to get through the entire curriculum for the 5th grade level in that 5th grade age range. I can take 2 years to go through that. So what this means is that the education for each of my children can be completely tailored to them if they are flying through things, learning how to do something really well, whether say it's science and they're just loving it and absorbing it. We can move as fast as they need to, but we can also slow down as we need to. I can set the pace that is perfect for them. Number 4 is lectures. I don't do any lectures in my homeschool. There's no reason for me to stand up in front of a board, whether it's a chalkboard or a whiteboard, and give a lecture and say, this is about this, here is the information on this. We do a lot of reading together. We learn together. We talk about things. We have discussions. There is no reason for me to prepare a lesson and to stand up there and give a lecture. Sometimes I've done certain curriculums and they've had to have a lesson, but I don't stand up and do that. I sit down next to the child and we go through the lesson. I might read, the lesson plan to them, what's scripted for me to say, especially with math. That really helped me out in their younger years when I didn't quite know exactly how to explain things to them. I would just read it exactly what it said. I don't need to stand up there. I don't need to do any type of lecture. I don't have to explain the Revolutionary War in a lecture type of environment. We can sit down and we can read that directly from a history book and discuss it. We can get up, we can take a look at a map, we can do whatever we want to with that. Number 5 is Common Core. I don't have to do Common Core in homeschool, and most likely you don't either. Now, this is not legal advice, but from my understanding, there is not one state that requires you to do Common Core. You might have some state regulations, might tell you some certain subjects that you need to cover, but you get to choose which books, which curriculum, and which resources you do for those different subjects. So I don't do Common Core. It was introduced when my kids would have been in school, but I had pulled them out before that. I don't have to do any of that stuff. I know that some people have very strong feelings about Common Core, but when it comes to homeschool, you don't have to do that. And that is a big question that I do get asked often over on Instagram. If you're not following me there, I'll put the link for that down below, where I kind of share, day-to-day sort of stuff. But I don't do Common Core. If some type of curriculum, which there aren't a lot, there's I guess more newer ones and they're mostly workbook style, set on it, meets Common Core standards, I don't take it. I don't do it. I avoid it like the plague. So we don't have to do Common Core. And if you're interested in doing Common Core, you can, but I don't have to do it, and therefore I do not do it in my homeschool. The number 6 thing that I don't do in my homeschool that public school does is the same approach for every single child. When it comes to some subjects like history and science, when they were younger, we would do those together. However, especially as they get older and for different subjects, I don't have to approach each subject the same exact way. What that means is that when, say, my child went through 6th grade, my oldest might have used certain curriculum, but then my next one came along and that just wasn't going to work for them. I can switch it up. I can do something different. And then my youngest, maybe it's a mix and match of those other two, or it's a completely different thing. I don't have to take the same approach for all of my children, and neither do you. Number 7, and my kids get a kick out of this one because they don't understand, but in my homeschool, my kids do not have to ask permission to use their bodily functions. They don't have to raise their hand, ask permission, get a hall pass or anything to go use the bathroom. Granted, if they're doing independent work, they can get up and use the bathroom whenever they want. But if we're doing morning time, we're doing a lesson together, then yes, it's respectful for them to say, excuse me, Mom, can I please quick go use the bathroom? But they also know that before we go and do those things, if they feel like they're gonna need to use the bathroom in that amount of time, go ahead and do it beforehand. But I don't make them ask permission to go take care of bodily functions. To them, that sounds like an absolutely foreign concept, and I get it. You have a classroom of 30 kids, you need some type of order, but when you're at home, you can just come and go and use the facilities as needed. Just like in real life. No, not usually at a job do you have to ask permission to use the lavatory, so you don't have to in my homeschool either. Number 8 in my list of 12 things that I don't do in my homeschool, the public school does, is that I don't necessarily stop education if my child is not feeling 100%. This is actually a very perfect day to do this one because I do have a kiddo that is not feeling quite up to, how they normally do. And he's laying in bed right now and he is watching a video about inventions. That's a perfect example of how I don't have to stop their education, their formal education, they're not feeling well. Now, granted, if they have something in their there's all kinds of stuff going on and they're miserable, I don't make them do stuff. We just take a sick day, and that child can take a sick day and the other kids don't have to take a sick day. But if they're just kind of feeling a little bit off, I can do some reading to them, we can discuss things, they can watch some documentaries. So I don't have to stop education because my child isn't feeling well, and I don't have to wait a certain amount of days to let them go back to their education. As they start to feel better, we can add in more things and get back to normal whenever they're feeling like they can handle that. Number 9, in my homeschool, our subjects and our day is not dictated by a bell. There is not a time limit. If we are having a great discussion about a subject, say we are doing our logic lessons or we're talking about economics, we don't have to stop because there's a bell that rings and says we have to move on to another subject. We can take our time. The opposite of that is true as well. If we finish up a subject faster than maybe I thought, then we just move on to the next one. And to be honest, there aren't really necessarily time limits that I even think of, or time constraints or thinking something is going to take a certain amount of time. We just go through our lessons and we see how long those take. After a few years, you kind of start to figure out, what kind of the rhythm of your day can be. But we don't operate by bells. There's no time limits. I don't say from 9 o'clock until 9:45 we are doing this subject, and from 9:45 until 10:15 we're doing this subject. We can just kind of come up with a rhythm. We can get through all of our stuff, and if the discussion kind of ends and it seems like they've absorbed that information, we can move on to the next subject. We can then add on to it the next day. But there is no schedule. There's nobody holding me to any certain time limits for anything. No bells ringing telling us that we have to move on to another subject when we're not quite ready to do so. Number 10, in the things that I don't do in my homeschool, what public school does is that I don't separate by ages. Okay, I do have 3 different kids, and the oldest to youngest have a 5-year difference. At this point, I'm only homeschooling my 11th grader and 8th grader, so there's a 3-year difference there for them. However, when it comes to certain subjects like math, their writing, and especially later in high school when they're doing college level courses, there are some subjects that are different. But we do a lot together, especially when my kids are of younger ages. If you have elementary school kids, kids all within a few years of each other, do as many of the subjects as possible that you can do together. It doesn't even mean that you have to separate out for English. You could do a little bit of a writing, and the youngest can just do copy work. And the middle, your middle child could do a little bit more, and older children can do even more. Nobody says that you have to separate them out specifically by different ages. We try to do as much as we can as a family because that really helps us to bond. In another video, I talked a little bit about this, and one of the great things about homeschooling is the bond that my family has together. We've had so many conversations, discussions. My kids don't always agree or see eye to eye, but they have the ability to discuss and talk about these things with each other, to have conversations. So we do as much as we can together. Even in my homeschool area, the kids aren't separated out. I mean, they have their own desk, their own little area to work in, but they work side by side, and it doesn't matter if a child is doing 1st grade work sitting next to a child who's doing 5th grade work. You don't have to separate them out by ages, and that is really a cool thing, is because younger kids can learn from older kids, and older kids can learn from younger kids as well. Number 11, and I alluded a little bit to this, is that in my homeschool, we have a rhythm to our day. I don't have a schedule. There is no set times for anything. Nothing has to be done by a certain time. We aim to be obviously done with all of our formal academics by a certain time. By having a rhythm instead of a schedule, I guess you could use the word routine as well, but I like to use the word rhythm because it just feels more natural. My goal is for us just to move from subject to subject just more naturally. When that day's maybe topic or discussion or lesson is complete, we can simply move on to the next one. We don't have to stop because, again, this goes back to the bell. There's no bells. We don't have to stop at a certain time for a subject. And also with the rhythm is when it gets to be about lunchtime and, sometimes I'll just kind of say, well, we didn't get as far as I thought we were going to get today. That's okay. We will just move those subjects to the next day because maybe we have a lot going on in the afternoon or we're just all worn out from everything that we learned. And last but not least, number 12. In my home, there is no separation of education and home and family. It is an entire lifestyle. Homeschooling can be a lifestyle. There doesn't have to be that separation. Yes, we have some formal academic time, but we're also a family. If some type of discussion comes up that's not necessarily related to that or family, it just kind of goes together. If there's an errand that my husband needs to run and he needs one of my kids to come with him, they go ahead and do that. There's just a melting together. We talk about things throughout the day, throughout, into the evening, on the weekends, when we go on vacations. There is not necessarily a separation. There is not a bell that rings at 12 noon and says, we're done. There's no more discussion of education or anything formal going on. No, it just continues on with that. We live life together every day. All 5 of us, our lives are interwoven together, and there is not necessarily that separation. In the evening, my youngest kiddo might tell, dad and his sister, his older sister who's not doing formal schoolwork with us now that she's graduated, stuff about he learned. We just bring up those things in conversations. We'll maybe watch documentaries together in the evening. There is no separation. It's not that this is school time and this is family time. It is all family time. Our entire day in life is family time. Sometimes we focus on formal academics. A lot of time we focus on informal academics, if you want to use that word, education, and just learning and doing life together. There you have it, the 12 things that I don't do in my homeschool that the public school does. Let's do a little recap, but I'm gonna need my cheat sheet here. I'm gonna miss some of them. Okay, so number 1, grading, meaning specifically subject grading. Number 2, testing. Number 3, no child left behind. 4, I don't do any type of lectures. 5, Common Core, not gonna do that. 6, I'm running out of hands, so you're gonna have to just imagine my extra hand. I don't take the same approach with every single child. Number 7, I don't make my kids ask permission to use the bathroom or take care of their bodily functions. Number 8, I don't stop educating. We don't stop the education if a child isn't feeling 100%. Number 9, our day isn't dictated by a bell. A bell doesn't tell us when we should stop and continue on with a new subject when it comes to school. Number 10, I do not separate out by ages. Number 11, our days are, I don't want to say dictated, but they roll like in a rhythm, not a schedule. And number 12, there is no separation between family and homeschool and education. It is all one entire homeschool lifestyle. So I hope those things have been helpful for you. If you are new to homeschooling, some of those might sound like they're super foreign and you don't quite know what that looks like in your family. Reach out, let me know, and I'll try to help you with that. But thank you for watching this video. I hope it encourages you to kind of think outside of the box of traditional public state school system and realize that homeschooling is an entire lifestyle and you get to decide what that looks like. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.